WNBA finals. And so I'll leave it there. I mean, I'm just obviously disheartened. I'm a human too. I have a family. I have 2 kids who are devastated by these comments. And so all I'll say is just, it's obviously been a tough week.
Everyone assumed she would keep her head down, play the role, and be thankful for the opportunity. They believed Caitlin Clark would smile through the noise, accept the hierarchy, and patiently earn her place. A rookie is supposed to wait. A star is supposed to fall in line. But something shifted behind closed doors, and now the league's biggest draw appears to be done playing along. Sources are buzzing that the face of women's basketball has quietly drawn a hard line, signaling she may be finished with Team USA altogether. And the most unsettling part isn't locker room tension. It's the growing sense the message came from the top. Comments from Commissioner Cathy Engelbert ignited scrutiny, validating the hostile environment surrounding Clark's rise. What was once framed as growing pains now feels like institutional failure. The story flipped from patience to protest. And if these reports hold weight, the WNBA may be staring down the loss of its asset. It began with a decision that immediately raised eyebrows across the basketball world. A choice that didn't just surprise fans, but fundamentally altered the direction of the conversation. When the Team USA roster for Paris was officially revealed, there was one omission so glaring it overshadowed every name on the list. The player driving television ratings, selling out road arenas, and forcing networks to reshuffle broadcast schedules was absent. Caitlin Clark wasn't injured. She wasn't unavailable. She simply wasn't wanted. The justification arrived quickly, wrapped in familiar language about experience, chemistry, and respect for veterans. The selection committee leaned heavily on the idea that Olympic success required continuity and trust built over years. But the explanation landed flat. It didn't align with reality. It didn't align with the numbers. And it certainly didn't align with the moment the sport was living in. Fans weren't confused. They were insulted. Because everyone understood what was really happening. This wasn't about basketball readiness. This was about hierarchy. Clark had entered the league and immediately shifted its center of gravity. She changed who mattered. She changed what fans watched for. And instead of embracing that momentum, the system chose to resist it. Leaving her off the roster wasn't neutral. It was declarative. It was a message delivered without words. You may be the headline, but you don't make the rules. That message echoed loudly as the season unfolded, because once the games began, the tone turned physical. From opening tip-offs onward, Clark was treated less like a rookie and more like a problem to be solved. Defenders tested the limits of legality. Screens came late. Contact lingered longer than necessary. And whistles stayed silent. There was a noticeable pattern forming, one that viewers at home couldn't ignore. This wasn't isolated aggression. This was sustained pressure. The most replayed moment came early, a blindside collision that knocked Clark to the floor before the play had even developed. It wasn't basketball instinct. It was a statement. And while individual plays can always be debated, the accumulation told a different story. What made it worse wasn't just the hits. It was what followed them. Or more accurately, what didn't. The league response was slow, cautious, and hesitant. Reviews dragged. Discipline came late. And accountability felt optional. Each delay reinforced the same unsettling impression: this was being allowed. The league had a rookie drawing unprecedented attention, and instead of protecting its most visible asset, it appeared content letting the situation play out organically, even as the tone grew darker. Fans began asking uncomfortable questions. Was this hazing? Was it resentment? Or was it simply indifference from leadership? Those questions reached a breaking point when the conversation shifted off the court. In an interview meant to calm tensions, Commissioner Cathy Engelbert did the opposite. Asked directly about the hostility surrounding Clark, she reframed the issue as rivalry. She invoked history. She compared the moment to iconic NBA duels of the past. The words may have been polished, but the message landed wrong. Instead of condemning the hostility, she contextualized it as beneficial. She spoke of attention, engagement, and growth. And in doing so, she missed the heart of the issue entirely. Fans didn't hear reassurance. They heard validation of the chaos. By reducing genuine concerns to marketing language, the league's top executive appeared to minimize the reality players and fans were witnessing in real time. The criticism was swift. Commentators, analysts, and even players felt compelled to respond. The Players Association distanced itself. Veteran stars issued statements emphasizing respect and safety. But once again, the timing mattered. The damage wasn't theoretical. It was already done. For Clark, the message was unmistakable. She was generating revenue, driving interest, and elevating the league's profile. Yet when faced with hostility, she stood alone. The system benefited from her presence but hesitated to defend her humanity. That disconnect is where the narrative began to shift. Because loyalty in professional sports is transactional. And when the balance feels off, players notice. Behind the scenes, conversations reportedly changed tone. The Olympic snub no longer felt temporary. It felt intentional. The physical play no longer felt competitive. It felt punitive. And the league's response no longer felt neutral. It felt complicit. The rookie who was once expected to be grateful now found herself questioning what gratitude was actually worth. Because respect, once withheld, is difficult to earn back. As the season wore on, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just about one roster or one interview. It was about control. About who gets to define the future of the sport. And whether that future includes the player who brought millions of new eyes with her. The league had made its stance visible. And Clark, quietly, was beginning to consider hers. The deeper this situation unfolded, the harder it became to ignore the underlying tension between generations. Team USA had long operated as a closed ecosystem, one built on familiarity and shared history. The same core players cycled through tournaments, forming bonds that extended beyond the court. That continuity brought success, but it also bred resistance to disruption. Caitlin Clark represented disruption in its purest form. She arrived with an audience that didn't ask permission. She commanded attention without seniority. And for some within the established hierarchy, that shift was uncomfortable. Rumors began circulating long before the Paris roster was finalized. Whispers that certain veterans were wary of the spotlight Clark attracted. Not because she couldn't play, but because she changed the dynamic. Cameras followed her. Headlines led with her name. And narratives that once centered on legacy now revolved around momentum. Public comments from respected figures added fuel to the speculation. Warnings about reality checks. Remarks about transitions. Statements that felt less like guidance and more like gatekeeping. And as Clark continued breaking records and leading statistical categories, those comments aged poorly. The Olympic tournament itself only sharpened the contrast. Team USA won, as expected. But something was missing. The buzz wasn't the same. Viewership spiked around discussion, not dominance. Fans tuned in out of obligation rather than excitement. Meanwhile, one exhibition game shifted perception entirely. When Clark faced Team USA alongside fellow stars, the difference was impossible to ignore. The pace was faster. The ball moved freely. Chemistry formed instantly. It dismantled the argument that integration would have been too difficult. The issue had never been fit. It had been ego. That realization reframed everything. The exclusion wasn't about protecting gold. It was about protecting status. And when that protection came at the expense of growth, the consequences became inevitable. Clark's value wasn't theoretical anymore. It was measurable. Attendance numbers surged league-wide. Broadcast deals expanded. Sponsorships followed. Every metric pointed in the same direction. The league was thriving, and she was the catalyst, which made the league's posture even more puzzling. Instead of leveraging that momentum, leadership appeared hesitant to fully embrace it. The messaging felt cautious. Sometimes dismissive. almost as if acknowledging Clark's impact threatened the balance of power. That tension spilled into media narratives, amplified by voices that consistently downplayed her accomplishments. Critics questioned records, shifted criteria, reframed success. And yet, those same voices remained prominently featured in league coverage. For any professional, that environment would feel hostile. For a player under constant scrutiny, it was exhausting. Clark rarely responded publicly. She kept her composure. She deflected. She focused on performance. But silence doesn't mean indifference. It often signals calculation. And increasingly, observers noticed something else. The usual denials never came. No agent statements. No affirmations of long-term national team aspirations. Just quiet silence, in this context, was loud. It suggested that options were being weighed. That leverage was being acknowledged. Because Clark didn't need the Olympics to elevate her profile. Her brand had already transcended domestic boundaries. International interest followed her wherever she played. The assumption that national representation was essential no longer held. The system needed her more than she needed it physically. The season had taken its toll. Clark logged heavy minutes. Faced constant pressure. Absorbed contact that went unpunished. And still delivered. But resilience has limits. And when support feels conditional, priorities shift. Load management isn't just about rest. It's about preservation. Of body. Of mind. Of autonomy. Fans felt the fracture forming. Longtime followers debated newcomers. Allegiances hardened. The discourse turned hostile. And instead of unifying the audience, league messaging exacerbated the divide. By framing conflict as engagement, leadership alienated the very fans fueling growth. If Clark walked away from Team USA, many would follow. Not out of protest, but out of disinterest. Because for them, she was the connection point. Looking ahead to Los Angeles, the implications loomed large. A home Olympics without the sport's biggest star would feel incomplete. Competitive, yes. Historic, no. Clark brought cultural relevance. She bridged casual viewers and diehards. Without her, the event risked becoming insular again. The league understood this. The panic wasn't imagined. It was structural. Financially, the timing couldn't be worse. Collective bargaining negotiations loomed. Players sought expanded benefits funded by recent revenue growth. Growth driven largely by Clark's arrival. Undermining that engine threatened everyone. Yet the disconnect persisted. The hand that fed the system was being pushed aside. At its core, the situation was tragic. Clark had grown up idolizing the program. Dreaming of the jersey. Wanting to contribute to a legacy she respected. To be met with resistance instead of mentorship was a profound disappointment. Not just for her, but for fans who believed the sport was ready to evolve. The system chose stability over possibility. And in doing so, it risked losing both. By this point, the narrative had fully inverted. What began as a conversation about patience had transformed into one about power. Caitlin Clark was no longer framed as a rookie earning her place. She was viewed as an entity navigating an institution that hadn't decided whether it wanted to adapt. The Olympic gold medal, once positioned as the ultimate goal, now seemed secondary to principle. Because representing something that doesn't represent you in return comes at a cost, the league found itself at a crossroads. On one path was reconciliation. Acknowledgement. Real accountability. On the other was denial. Corporate language. And the hope that time would smooth things over. History suggested the latter was more likely. But Clark's presence complicated that assumption. She wasn't dependent. She wasn't replaceable. And she wasn't unaware. Speculation intensified as months passed without clarity. Would she accept future invitations? Would she publicly address the situation? Or would she quietly distance herself, focusing solely on her professional obligations? Each option carried weight. But one thing became clear. The leverage had shifted. The league once assumed that access to the Olympic platform was indispensable. Clark challenged that belief simply by existing. Her influence extended beyond games. She inspired participation. Youth enrollment spiked. Merchandise flew off shelves. She brought visibility to cities and teams that had long struggled for relevance. That impact wasn't fleeting. It was foundational. And yet, institutional recognition lagged behind reality. The commissioner's comments remained a flashpoint. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No firm stance against hostility. No unequivocal defense. Just framing. And for a player navigating unprecedented scrutiny, that absence felt like abandonment. When leadership prioritizes optics over protection, trust erodes. Trust, once broken, is difficult to restore. Especially when it involves personal safety and dignity. Clark had absorbed criticism with grace. She avoided confrontation. She kept her focus narrow. But even professionalism has its limits. Walking away doesn't always mean quitting. Sometimes it means refusing to participate in dysfunction. The league's internal calculus grew increasingly complex. Without Clark, future growth projections dimmed. Sponsorship negotiations hinged on star power. Broadcast partners valued storylines that reached beyond core audiences. Clark delivered that reach effortlessly. Losing her presence on the international stage would ripple outward. It wasn't just about medals. It was about relevance. Players, too, faced a reckoning. The benefits they sought were tied directly to momentum. Momentum driven by a phenomenon they seemed reluctant to embrace. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. You can't demand expansion while resisting change. You can't celebrate growth while marginalizing its source. Fans sensed the irony. They debated loyalties. They questioned leadership. And many concluded that the league had mismanaged its defining moment. The opportunity wasn't just to win games. It was to capture imagination. And imagination thrives on inclusion, not exclusion. As the conversation shifted toward the future, one truth stood out. Caitlin Clark didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her silence spoke volumes. It conveyed autonomy. It signaled awareness. And it reminded everyone watching that power in modern sports isn't confined to institutions. It lives with individuals who move culture. If reconciliation happens, it will require humility. Not statements. Not spin. Real action. Acknowledging mistakes. Setting boundaries. Protecting players unequivocally. Whether the league is capable of that remains uncertain. What is certain is that the window is closing. The story that began with a roster decision has evolved into a referendum on leadership. On whether progress is embraced or resisted. On whether stars are nurtured or merely utilized. Caitlin Clark represents a turning point. Not because she demanded it. But because the moment demanded her. If she chooses distance, the consequences will be lasting. Not catastrophic, but transformative. The league will continue. The games will be played. But the opportunity to redefine the sport on its own terms may have already slipped away. And history will remember not just the gold medals won, but the future that was deferred. In the end, this isn't about entitlement. It's about alignment. When values diverge, separation becomes inevitable. Clark has already proven her worth. The question now is whether the system will recognize it before it's too late. Because revolutions don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they simply move on. The WNBA may have secured another Olympic gold, but they could be risking something far more valuable. Is Caitlin Clark right to draw a line and protect herself, or should she have played the long game until 2028? How this moment is handled won't just affect one player, it could shape the direction of women's basketball for years to come.